Not me just saying something. I've heard this from principals. Thank you for staying in the trenches with our kids. We've seen Christians come in until they get what they want, and then we don't see them anymore. Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome back, I guess, to the podcast here at Rescue Generation called A Different Cloth. This is a whole new spin on our podcast, and I'm super excited. I got my guy Angel.
Let's go.
Here from the East Coast.
Yeah, I'm from the West Coast now, but yeah.
You're out here on the West Coast now, from the East Coast. Welcome, bro. Glad you.
Appreciate you.
We're gonna be hanging together for quite a bit, you know.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for it. I'm excited to talk a bit and have some good conversations.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. Well, as we just jump into some of the stuff that we're gonna be talking about, we wanted to kind of do a hard reset of the podcast. We had a few episodes out that some people were listening to or whatever, but we just feel like the season is now for us to really start to talk about the work we do, what we're all about, and things of that sort. And you're one of our newest team members.
Yes, I am.
So on the spot, tell us what your experience been like working with Rag.
It's been
for the last few
terrible.
months. I figured,
No, I mean, it's been, so when I first met you, you really said like, like everyone. I think one of the things that stuck out, you said something along the lines of like, it's been like an inviting place. Like it's a place to like heal. It's a place to receive. But it's just like a melting pot of like ideas and creativity and like people who really care. And I was like, there's no place like that. That's not real. Like everybody says that about their team, but I think really joining the team, it's been A1.
Let's go. Sure. That's hype. I'd never heard them say that. Yo, this is just like on the spot, so that's fire.
Nah, yeah, it's been A1. I think everybody's been lovely. I've met some really great people here. Some of them not too much, but yeah.
Of course. Everywhere you go, No, it's been man, a really great season for us. We've been busy.
Yeah.
We're on 40 schools right now, so you got to kind of dive in. You got kind of jumped into the deep end, really.
I mean, yeah.
Your school, we won't even got to mention the school, but they literally said, here's 6 of our worst students. And you get to have,
the brightest students.
Yeah, brightest.
Yeah.
Did they say brightest for it?
No.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. But they said, here's 6 of our all-stars. and you get to spend 10 weeks with them. How's that experience been for you?
I mean, for me, they're the brightest. For me, they're the ones that shift culture in the school.
Yeah.
For me, they're the ones that can literally make it a good school. The turnaround. Those are the turnaround kids. For me, they have such an impact on everyone else in that school that if I can just love on them and just work with them a bit, I mean, I think sky's the limit for all of them, truly. And then right out of the gate, even talking about, I have 2 twins that they're really dope, and they're hard workers. And I remember the principal coming to me and he was like, "Hey, listen, I don't know what you're doing with them twins, man, but they're really changing things around. You know?
Let's go."
And then one kid went from all F's to all A's. So
Let's
been
go.
pretty dope.
I love that, man. I mean, you hear success stories, but you don't hear them every day. When you're in the trenches, right? You're not always hearing like, "Oh my God, this kid had a complete turnaround." And the fact that you're not even done with the 10 weeks and you're already hearing some of those results, I think is a massive win, just for RAG in general, and for the work that we do. So that's dope, man. Well, tell me a little bit about Angel. Who are you? How'd you get here to RAG, to California?
All right, so my first name Angel, middle name Gabriel, my last name Maldonado. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, right? Which but I guess people don't. I've been married 8 years this July, July 4th. That way I don't forget my wedding. And I have 2 beautiful boys. I got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. They take all my energy. But I had the privilege of serving the city of New York City for about 16 years.
Wow.
And I mean, that's been a joy. I spent the last 7 years serving kids incarcerated, ages 13 to 19 years old. I mean, that's been a roller coaster on its own. But I mean, I love every single last one of those kids. And now I feel like I'm out in Cali. I think there's a lot of different reasons, right? I think Mental health wise, for me, this is the best place I've ever been as far as like my mental health, as far as like mental clarity. I've been A1 since every time I visited every year, it's just always like a place I never want to leave. So we always knew that was in our destination. I think how my life started turning out, and it wasn't like nothing crazy, but I think I got very complacent in my spiritual walk, and I think when you're serving and you're leading and you're doing a bunch of things, you tend to pull God out of decision making,
Oh, facts. Yeah.
and then you lie to yourself and you say, oh well, it's discernment, and God has given us discernment, and God is, He's leading me this way, and it was just a lot of my pride and emotions that were kind of pushing me in different directions. Then I started making decisions that weren't the healthiest, and I think God blessed me enough and had mercy on me with a nice reset, and I think California is that reset.
Man, there's so much. It was just to pause here and unpacking that, right? Like you're describing this. It sounds like burnout, right? Because that's what burnout sounds like.
Sure.
And typically you don't realize you're in it till you're in it, and you're
Yeah.
like, get me out of here, you know. But when you make decisions outside of God, outside of a healthy place, that's what burnout literally feels like. Would you say you were burnt out there?
I mean, okay, does it consist of me having to stop something? Because I feel like I've never stopped. And the reason why I say it, right? So this is why I don't know if it's necessarily burnout. For me, I think there's a calling over my life, and I think it took a while for my character to catch up to my calling,
Okay.
right? And I think I've grown to endure certain things and certain perspectives. All right, so let's just be real, right? So, for example, my last 7 years working with kids incarcerated, a big part of my job was partnering with churches in New York City to either mentor or financially support my kids. I think where it started blurring the lines between my job and my personal life and my walk with Christ and my church is it was very hard for me to find people who actually cared about kids incarcerated. The lost kids. It was very hard to find people who can really, you know, give of themselves, to
Yeah.
to my kids, and I think it started to affect me. I think it started to affect me because it was almost like, so we're the church, but yet, we're not the church here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And instead of me getting closer to God, I think I got a little bit more bitter.
Yep.
And it didn't push me away from God, but it kind of pushed me away from now. It bled into my personal life, and I'm like, wait, well, I can't expect this from this church if my church is not doing the same. And then that kind of had me questioning my church and where I was at. And that's a whole different conversation. But I think once I started questioning things, then everything became alarming to me.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I don't think every form of burnout requires like a stop
Okay.
and sit. I think extreme forms absolutely do. I mean, that you could get to a place where medically you need to sit down somewhere, right? Because you just need to recoup. There's a book called Leading on Empty that speaks very clearly to that. As I'm listening to what you're describing, I'm thinking of the scripture, "Come to me, all you who are burdened," and I love. Actually, my wife told me the amplified version of that, and it says, "Come to me, so you can find the unforced rhythms of grace." Right, and to me, that's like I can still do all the things, but there's an unforced rhythm in it, right? Where, so I think two things I would say contributes to burnout in this sense. In listening to your story, is callousness from Christians, right? Of the people that you're supposed to be doing the work with, maybe some bitterness, some offense, right? So some of that, as it creeps in, it does create a hard heart. I think to me, that's probably the beginning aspect of what burnout becomes like. Because then you're doing ministry separate from God.
Yeah.
So you're doing ministry for God, but not with God. And that should never, that's not how, ministry was literally created so we can co-labor with Christ, right? We get to do this with him. A mentor of mine says it like this. He says, the only reason God needs us in ministry is so he can spend more time with us.
Right.
Like that's really what this whole thing should be all about, right? So when you get frustrated at the people that aren't doing the work, you don't want to give, you don't want to partner, you don't want to come into the juvies with me, you don't whatever that is. I think it is. It's the beginning of what could become a crash and burn.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know you, I know you're gifted. So then from that point forward, you're gifting your way through because you're doing what you got to do.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. And I think I think I didn't, it's interesting. I feel like God has so many names, right? And I didn't use him as my counselor. You know what I mean? And I didn't really like sit with him and
good.
really navigate through what I was going through, what my kids best needed. But then at the same time, I feel like I wasn't intentional on letting God into every piece of the decision making in my life.
Yep.
Like even before we moved out here, me and my wife, we practiced something small. We're going to be very intentional about every decision. So, for example, I'm talking about like where we were eating,
Yeah.
what hotel we were staying at,
Yeah.
which road we were going to take. We were just practicing being very intentional in our prayers with God and inviting Him into every little decision. Like whether it's small or big, like, all right, walk into this decision with us. You know what I mean? And I think that started creating a better habit. So
I love that. So being in ministry, so you said I served the city for 16 years,
Yeah.
but I served incarcerated youth for 7 years. So were you in ministry for 16 years?
yeah, so I would say for about 16 years I've served youth
Okay.
and a lot of outreach, so a lot of community.
Okay. Just not specifically the incarcerated
No,
youth.
no, no. That was
And
the
then
last 7. Yeah.
last 7 years. No, that's really good. So you got 16 years of experience, which for most people in youth ministry is unheard of, that level of longevity, unfortunately. Right? What is it that has kept you in the game for 16 years? And watch this, even despite the frustration from other believers and what they weren't doing, something in you kept you going to those juvies, right?
Yeah.
What was it that kept you in the game for 16 years?
I think there's a melting pot of things.
Okay.
For me, it definitely comes down to one thing. Not comes down to one thing, but if I can like put it all in a few words, I'm a firm believer in be who you needed when you were younger.
Okay, love it.
And that's something I've always lived by.
Yeah.
And I think that's that, and I think love is the calling over like my life. I feel like people are called to be pastors, they're called to be preachers, called to be so many things. I feel like I'm called to love, and just love on people unconditionally. And I think I'm pretty good at that. I think I'm pretty good at loving on people and being there for people. And I think those two things mixed, above all, has always like kept going.
We've only known each other for a few months now. What do you think my ultimate calling is, like in light of that, right? Yours is love. From your perspective into my life so far, what would you say mine is?
I mean, I don't know. I would say,
Like I have a thought, so I can answer the question. I'm just curious to know what your perspective is.
your calling. Like as far as you want like a specific.
Like, we're not looking for a title or position.
Okay, so for me, you're a shepherd.
Okay.
For me, you're a shepherd. You're someone who disciples.
Okay.
Obviously those are probably two different things, but
Okay.
yeah. And then I feel like you're a Renaissance man, so it's very, very different. You know what I mean? So
All right.
Yeah.
All right. That's fair. I think to me, when I think of my just overall journey, where I've come from, what RAG represents, and all the places that God has positioned me, I would say I'm a deliverer. I feel like I'm a Moses type, right? Not to say that I'm Moses or anything like that, because I think you get a little sketchy when people try to put themselves in that position.
Right.
But I feel like I'm called to bring people to freedom everywhere I go, right? And so the whole reason Rescue a Generation exists is to rescue students out of whatever they find themselves in, right? And so I would say, and yes, I carry a shepherd's heart for sure. I probably lean on, not denominationally, but gifting wise, on the apostolic side of like spiritual gifts and things like that. But in the core of like, man, I feel like I'm called to this. I feel like I'm called to be a deliverer for the rest of my life. And that's a dope. And I totally see you called to love people well. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like you've been doing that for a while.
I mean, I got a question for you.
Uh-oh.
Right. So you're talking about rescued. What would your definition of being rescued or rescuing would be for a young person?
That's a good question. Um, Definition is hard. I could describe it better than I could define it. And I go to this reference, and even like this was, I felt like I had a reality check or an epiphany thinking about why we use the word rescue. Because in all reality, I got a lot of pushback around using the word rescue for a while from the church circles, and for this one reason. Everybody will argue that we don't do the rescuing. Jesus rescues us. God rescues us. I'm not saying he doesn't, right? At all. That's not an argument I'm willing to take. I fully agree with that. But from Genesis to Revelation, God always uses people, right? So like to say that God rescues people absent from another person, that I mean he can do it. We see him do it through Saul who became Paul, right? But typically you see an encounter with a person or of some sort, discipleship, something along those lines that pulls people out. So how I would define the need to be rescued, I think when people are drowning, I think of water. I think of a ship being shipwrecked. Think of the Titanic, right? Like go all the way there and think they are drowning. And how do I define if they're rescued? Well, when they're not in the water anymore, when they're healthy, when they're safe, when they're no longer shivering, right? When it doesn't even feel like they were in there at some point. So if you look at the end of the Titanic movie where she's telling the story, you outside of her telling that story, you would have never known that she was in the Titanic,
Right.
because she doesn't have the wetness, the residue, the like stuff still. So I think when I think of somebody being rescued, I think completely removed from the thing you're drowning in or things you're drowning in, and healthy enough to be able to tell the story.
Yeah.
Healthy enough to be able to look back and be like, okay, yeah, I'm not there no more, right? And I feel like that's been my story since I'm proof that God still rescues people. I'm not saying I'm the only proof,
Yeah.
but I feel like I'm proof of that because I mean when people look at me, I got gang members today that when I tell them I used to be in a gang, they don't believe me. To me, that just means I don't look like what I've been through, right? That's a win for me. I'm happy that you don't believe that I used to be about that life. I got a bunch of people that can attest that I was, right? But you don't have to believe that because I'm not here to try to prove nothing, right? So for me, I don't look like that. I don't sound like that. I'm not acting like that anymore. I've been rescued.
Do you feel like because of the type of lane, I don't want to call it a lane, the area that you're serving, I guess it's a personal question now, do you feel like, one, you're understood or you're put in a box?
Put in a box. Well, I think everybody gets put in a box. Realistically, I think what you show me over time. In my mind, I'm going to box you in. I think for the last, 20 years I've been in ministry. I've always done urban ministry and in like inner cities and low income communities. And so, while absolutely, I think people from the outside looking in box me into that. I also think in the preacher world, if you can call it that. I hate that that's a thing,
Sure.
right? But I think certain people don't bring me because I'm only urban, right? Or they think I'm too urban. Now, I will say that's been evolving a little bit, and I don't know. Bro, my last 2 speaking engagements was with nothing but white kids, and it was awesome. You know what I mean? And because I think the world's becoming more urban anyways.
Yeah.
So I think your suburban, rural, Caucasian kids understand the same lingo because you got a Cardi B and all these people that they're listening to that they kind of are picking up on it. Yeah. Now they might not have the urban experience, right? But the culture of being urban, I think everybody's starting to understand a little bit more because of culture. But yeah, so I do think I get put in a box. I'm not mad at the box though. Like I don't think I'm offended at the box, and I think a lot of people are like, don't put me in a. I'm like, yeah, put me in there for now. At some point, I'm gonna break out the box, right? But I don't mind you boxing me in for a season or a moment or a season that I'm in or the thing that I'm doing. That don't mean I got to stay there forever.
Yeah,
That's your question.
No, that's good. I mean, I got another one for you. If that's
Oh
okay.
yeah, you.
In talking that way, so let's say, what does the next 5 years of RAG look like?
You ever? No, you're good. You're good.
Okay, yeah.
Like you ever seen Pinky and the Brain?
Yeah, of course.
That's what the next 5 years looks like. What are we gonna do today, Pinky?
Trying to take over the world.
Let's try or brain try to take over the world. That's the name of the game, and I don't mean it. And that's strong language to use, and I fully understand that. But here's what I mean by that: the type of students we serve and the heart of the work that RAG does. Ultimately, the need is everywhere, and I don't think everybody needs RAG specifically. But I think everywhere needs RAG specifically, right? There's a lane that God's called us to that I feel like we are finding our niche and we're running full speed in. And so because we've created a solution to a problem that's not going to stop tomorrow, I feel like we've created a way to make an impact for decades and until Jesus comes back, right? So I genuinely feel like the next 5 years will be in multiple states, multiple cities, potentially multiple countries. And that's a new thought for me. I used to only think we'd be like the cities in America. But I've talked to a few people over the last couple of years and the need in El Salvador and like Belize and like these places, there's such a need for the work that we do. And there's not a lot of people with the understanding of how to go about reaching these students. That I feel like God has specifically graced us with. And so that is incredible. We're thankful for that, right? But now, how do we fan that flame? How do we maximize that? How do we do that on a larger scale? And so at the same time, I think a lot of people that think massive like that lose the heart of their backyard. And I don't think we're doing that either. I think our heart is for our community. It's for the city we live in. It's for the place all around us, which is where we're making the biggest impact first. And so if we can happen to expand and do that, great, right? But also if God never does that for us, we'll spend the rest of our existence reaching Southern California, and I'll be okay with that too. Right. But I just feel like the need is everywhere. So it's easy for us to foresee us going to multiple places.
Yeah. When I was serving kids in New York, incarcerated, so I think something, I don't know if it's by default, something happened to me where I only cared about my type of kid, right? Realistically speaking, like if I didn't really care about the kids that were saved, I'm like, yo, you guys have you have your two parents, you got your youth pastor. I care about these group of kids.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for me to balance the understanding that pain is what all kids can deal with, right? Neglect, all kids can deal with. Abuse, all kids deal with. How did you balance the many kids you served, or are currently serving?
Yeah, it's funny because you've been at my school and your school.
Very different.
Two completely different types of kids, right? Sure. Like, I mean, you're dealing with some of the harder, kind of rougher background. I'm dealing with kids that they go through stuff, but it's not at the level or the deepness. Even some of the kids in our group that are trying to be hard, I'm like, bro, I'll pull your card. You know what I mean? Like, you're not that tough. But I would say this. I think prior to the pandemic, if you were to ask who RAG's like demographic or population is, I would have said Title I schools, inner cities, low-income communities, hands down across the board. The pandemic, to me, leveled the playing field because what we saw in a district that's not Title I, here in Southern California, it's our largest district, the need in that district was almost identical to a need in a low-income community, with the only exception being the amount of trauma they face from their household. But you talk about depression, anxiety, fighting, anger, like these things were showing up in more affluent schools as well. When I would talk to some of these schools, I would say, "What's the biggest problem you're facing?" They was like fighting. I was like, "Okay, whoa, like is that something y'all are that used to?" And they said, "No, not really." No. And actually, for them, it was like girls that are doing a lot of the fighting. And so now I think the playing field is level. Now I think every school in America needs the work we do.
Right.
Some will need probably more intentional, deeper, focused work. But everybody needs to work, right? And so to me, I think the pandemic shifted my thought on that, especially because of the way that district opened up to us was like, yo, we need you here. And if you would have asked me, I'd have been like, no, you don't. And even still to an extent, sometimes I'm like, y'all don't have, as deep of a need as like some of these other districts do, but it doesn't mean they don't have a need.
Right.
And if we value students, then and we do, right? Then we got to go where the need is. And to me, the need is everywhere. So how do we position ourselves for that? And that means we have to even myself, I have to remove some of my own personal biases because I would much rather a gang member than a kid from an affluent house who's depressed, right? But that's my own bias because of my own background. But it doesn't mean God can't use me to rescue this kid too. And so for me, that had to shift my whole perspective on that.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
As we jump into, some of these next few episodes of this conversation, some of our focus is like, man, well, like what anchors us? What keeps us like why? You made a statement that you said, your why is very specifically to be to a kid what you wish you had. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah.
Are there other whys for you? I mean, that's a pretty evident why, right? Yeah. And it keeps you in front of young people and all of that. Are there any other whys that anchor you to the work you do?
Oh, yeah. I mean, sure. So I grew up in the projects. I know they're pretty different out here, right? But I grew up in the projects.
They're just not high rises.
Okay.
Have you been to projects out here?
No. I mean, we can go.
I was about to say, we got to make a road trip. Y'all trying to make a road trip? We got to make a road trip.
But
the Nickerson Gardens, let's pull up for real. Look at Eric.
So here's the reality of it, right? In all honesty, it started off with me having an issue with the church at a very, very young age, right? Besides Yogi Bear in New York.
Hold on, describe Yogi Bear. I know what you're referencing.
Okay, so
but you got to.
So for me, explain. Yogi Bear is I don't want to mess this up, but it's probably like Metro. It happened at Metro World Child, but essentially Yogi Bear was a program that would come around every Saturday morning in a school bus, pick kids up from the neighborhood, take them to church. You would have a good time.
So it's a bus ministry.
Yes,
focus. And just to not like downplay Yogi Bear, it's the largest
they were everywhere.
Sunday school in America. Like literally, it's the largest bus ministry in America. I only know that because I was saved through the second largest one, and they mimicked a lot of what Yogi Bear was doing. So yeah. But yeah, so Yogi Bear, okay.
So for us, it was just that. But I mean, if you missed the bus, then you weren't able to go. But all right. So what happened was, all right, my parents were always believers, right? My father passed away at the age of, I was 13, not at his 13. When I was 13 years old, I started to ask certain questions that the church couldn't answer. Why did he die? Why are certain people healed and not him?
Okay.
Me understanding that he gave his complete and total life to Christ and always served since young. Like, why did he get that short end of the stick?
Yeah.
And there were just questions that, one, couldn't be answered. And I'm like, not only couldn't be answered.
I'm curious, what were some of the responses you would get in those? I mean, did you get responses at all?
I got a lot of, this is what I got. I got a lot of, don't be mad at God.
Okay.
Pray and you'll find the answer.
Okay.
I got a lot of, you're too young to understand.
Sounds about right.
But the problem was, I think I've always been pretty good at identifying my surroundings and what was happening around me.
Yeah.
And I always had a heart for a lot of the friends that I had. That for me, I feel like I was at least there was a benefit, right? Or I was blessed enough to be able to go to a pastor or to a leader or someone and at least ask the question.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my friends growing up didn't have that outlet to even ask. Yep. You know what I mean? Or even understand that, wait, I can ask that sort of question. And what it boiled down to, I felt like the church didn't really teach young people how to grieve. And it was about like, oh, well, we're just praying. And not just grieving a loss, but, grieving, my father's not coming home anymore. Wow. Or grieving, my parents split up. Or grieving, and all that was happening around me. And I think all we cared about when I was younger was like, campaña de jóvenes, you know what I mean? Like, like youth campaigns and whatever it's called. And it was just all these things. And I kept questioning. And I mean, they hated it. But I think that drove me to want to understand more. learn more and see how all right, well, if where are we lacking? What can I do? Not just of like, oh, well, this is the issue, man. Let me just pray that this get. What can I do? And I think that was like my first thing of like jumping all in
Yeah.
to something like that. And then as I got older, I started asking questions of like, okay, why does the church lack so much empathy? You know what I mean? Or why is it that the lifespan of a youth pastor is like slim to none at this point?
Absolutely.
Like, where are the youth pastors? Do we care about youth? You know what I mean? And I think the Bible's very specific too. So I'm trying to understand as I go the constant neglect for young people. Period.
Wow.
And I feel like I've always been called to stay in this area, I guess,
Yeah.
you know. That amongst, me meeting kids and me pouring into kids and understanding what discipleship look like, what it looks like to shepherd somebody, what it looks like to grow with somebody.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a joy when you see a young person and then they get married and you're at their wedding, you there's a joy, yeah. There's
Yeah.
just a joy, and I think a lot of those things
Yeah.
it started with me more questioning.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. We work with kids, and I feel like a kid from your background may have even more questions because of your life experience and your upbringing than your average church kid, right? I know you said you got a lot of these kind of fluff answers, pray, you don't understand yet, don't be mad at God. But you're obviously still here, still a believer, still love the Lord. What kept you through though? Because when I hear that, I think, okay, something kept you stable despite what they said. Be like otherwise. Because if I hear a kid doing that now and they get these fluff answers, they're going to YouTube University.
Right.
They're gonna go look up a bunch of other thoughts about trying to get those answers for themselves. What kept you in the faith as you're trying to figure out these questions?
Two things. So when I was young, you always got what do you want to be when you grow up?
Okay.
But I guess the church perspective is like, do you want to be a pastor? Do you want to be an evangelist? Do you want to
Yep.
be a singer, a worship leader, or whatever? For me, I literally kept answering that same question, like, man, I just want to make it to tomorrow. Like, I don't even know if I'm in the position to choose that right now.
Okay.
And when I understood that, I feel like I did a good job of understanding. Like, wait, there's a group of people who don't really care about those things. They just want to be loved. They just want to be cared for.
That's good.
And I think ultimately finding my love in Christ was a game changer. And for me, I was desperate with trying to understand the God that my father served.
Okay.
Like that, I knew,
get that.
I
Yeah.
knew what my dad meant to me,
Okay.
and I knew how important he was to me.
Wow.
And I remember asking God
Wow.
in like Juarez, Mexico, at the age of 19 years old, I asked him like, God, if you're real, like I want to know the God that my father served.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it just
Yeah.
there was just a desperate need to know like, man, I know my dad ain't he not weak or he not
Yeah.
he's not weird. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I firmly believed in how he walked, and
Yeah.
I was just so intrigued. Like,
Love that because to me that speaks to the value of an older person's faith
Yeah.
in the life of a young person, even if you don't see the fruit right in that moment. Which is why it gets so frustrating when you see leaders in the church going astray, or when you see them, dare I use the word, deconstructing to the point of I'm not interested anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not mad at you deconstructing some of the things that you learned that were you just like church things that you figured, like, I'm not mad at that all the way.
Yeah.
But to the point of you like denouncing scripture or the fellowship of the believer or like stuff like that, I think I'm all the way against that, right? And so, man, but to have a dad whose faith was that solid, to now know that his son saw his dad's faith and said, okay, God, because you've gone through a lot. I know of some of the story, not all of it, right? But for you to just be like, man, I want to know the God my dad served. I want to be that type of person that says, I want to know the God Jose served. I want to know the God that he followed because of how he lived his life and what he stood for and what he was about. I love that just thought of like, man, just the importance of being that type of an example.
Yeah.
In a world where you're right, Christians lack empathy in some ways. I would say, for certain communities.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they lack empathy across the board.
Oh, no.
Because they empathize with who they want to empathize with, right? But for certain communities, it is a lot harder, I think, in some cases, to want to really sit and dwell or even suffer with another person who doesn't look like you, is not from where you're from. And so as I'm saying that, I'm just thinking of so many young people that we work with that, man, they would give anything for somebody to just like come and sit with them in the middle of a painful moment,
Right.
and be like, yo, we're here, right? We're here. And so many Christians lack that level of empathy that will draw them to like suffer with another person. And that sucks. Like it's just not good. But I'll do it for a neighbor that I feel safe around, right? I'll do it for somebody else that I feel, oh, we grew up together, or we've done all these things. So it's easy for me to empathize in that way, but not for a marginalized community, a homeless person, or displaced person, sorry. Like something along those lines, I think it's a lot harder to do that. And I'm guilty. I'm not just talking like, because I have for sure walked past plenty of people that I could have sat with and asked some questions and been like, okay, yeah, but I got to go from point A to point B. You know what I mean? And so definitely I think that's something worth saying, is like, man, if these people had somebody to look up to that was willing to come and show them the way,
Right.
so much of their communities, I think, would be changed.
Right. So I would say that way we're not beating up the church so much.
Yeah.
What would you say is 2 to 3 good ways to bridge the gap between the church and the youth or the young people?
Particularly, I would say urban young people or
Yes.
at-risk young people, just for the context of what we're talking about.
Sure.
Well, number one, I think we. I'm going to say we as the church, because I am in the church, like, and I'm a part of a local church. I believe in the local church, but I would say we got to stop being know-it-alls first, right? We got to start learning to ask some real questions and to listen long enough to what somebody else is going through, and not assume that they just got to listen to my answers because I know the way, right? Or because I know Jesus, you got to listen to. Like, nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. It's the most common thing in ministry. I think I hear it all the time, but that's a real statement. So we got to stop being know-it-alls. Second thing is, I think we got to get over our fears and biases. Let's just be real. Some neighborhoods make people nervous, right? That's a fact. And it's hard, but why? And I think a part of the why is because there's a lack of understanding and a lack of courage to be able to move past that bias to get some understanding. So I'd much rather just keep that at arm's distance as long as I'm safe and I'm clear. Yeah. Well, look, when you signed up for faith, you never signed up to live a safe life. And so it's not about your safety. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you to go like put yourself in harm's way and like, I'm not saying that, but you got to get over your own fears and biases. And then the third thing is, I think you got to stick around long enough to actually see the change, or at least to earn the right to share deeper conversations with people. What I've seen ridiculed the most in the world we live in, from a faith organization or Christian clubs or anything on school campuses, they've said this. This is not me just saying something. I've heard this from principals. Thank you for staying in the trenches with our kids. We've seen Christians come in until they get what they want, and then we don't see them anymore.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking, because we want to love kids and we want the long-lasting relationships with these schools and districts, because we want to see the impact in these young people. But we got to fight against the negative breakups that happened through other Christian organizations and churches. And that is detrimental. So I think, asking questions, getting over your own personal fears and biases, and then actually playing the long game.
Yeah.
People are not projects. They're people. And if we're going to be in a relationship together, sure, we could be in there for 3 months, but I'd much rather be in there for 18 years.
Yeah.
Because that's what a real relationship is, right? Most people don't like short-term relationships like that. Most Christians wouldn't like that. Somebody came into your life for 3 months and then bounced. Most Christians would be hurt by that.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's what we do so much to urban students, to at-risk students. Come to life for 3 months and then peace, right? And so, yeah, that's what I would say is, to me, how we bridge that gap a little bit.
So breaking it down even more, like being super, super practical with it. Jose, I get all that you said, but how do I start? What would be the first thing I do? Like, can you break it down even that?
Well, I would say,
Like, I have a love for young people.
I hear
I
you.
see what you're saying. I just don't know how to start.
yeah, I think you got to find a place to start first. I think, like, so for instance, context is key. So I think knowing, I mean, is your heart for schools, or is it for a particular city or community? Because depending on your context, I would tell you where to start differently, right? Maybe my heart is just for a community. Well, I would say, well, why not go door to door even, and ask questions and like get to know your neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Like, if your heart's for a school, I would say show up to the school once a week, asking how you can serve or things like that, right? So I think literally finding the place that you could begin at and then following those 3 steps. Ask questions, don't come in with answers, right? Because that's nobody wants to hear that you know it all.
Right.
Ask questions, find out what can you do. So I just think the place that you start is the most important part. And I think that could be different for everybody. But everybody should have a place that we can start. But ultimately, I think when you go into what kept you in the game for 16 years, I've been in ministry for 21 years. The idea of doing ministry is sexy because it makes you feel good. It makes you like, oh man, I feel good about this. But I think if you anchor yourself to why you're doing it, to be the person that I wish I had, right?
Yeah.
Or to literally, be the one that helps to deliver people from whatever it is, or to be rescued. To me, that is the most important place to start.
Yeah.
Because if you just go knock on a door and you have no anchor to stay there, you're probably going to do more damage realistically than you are, staying there for a long. Then you are going to be staying in the ministry for a while. So I would say finding a why would be the most important. Like, why do you want to do that?
Right.
Because let me just be also real. And I know I'm long-winded right here, but like, I know so many pastors and preachers that preach for their own sake more than for the sake of the people they're called to. And it's one of the most detrimental things I see in ministry, that people are more consumed with their ego than the people that God is calling them to. And that comes because people aren't anchored to a why. You got to find a why. Why do you want to do this? If you just want to do this to be a pastor, don't do it. You just want to do this to be a church planner, don't do it. You just want to do this. But if you want to do this to really impact the community, to really love on a person, to really see change, then those are deeper whys that I think will keep you in the game for quite a while.
How important is preparation within the why?
Well, I think preparation is important anywhere, right? But I do think sitting with the why question. So, for instance, we're talking today, and where if somebody was to listen to this and they're like, man, okay, I'm gonna go find my why, and they found a why in 5 minutes, right? Okay, oh, that's my why. I would say you probably haven't sat with your why very long. And I would question how much roots your why has, right? Because I feel like a shallow why is not going to keep you in the game
Yeah.
for years, right? So when you talk about preparation, I think sitting with that why thing is going to be really vital as you prepare to even do anything first. I would say, what are your thoughts on the preparation side of that?
I mean, for me, I think for me it's tough, right? I think as believers, as Christians, we tend to always want the big moment, right? The David and Goliath moment, and I think it's understanding that David, he looked after sheep, he got dirty, you know what I mean? Like there was years of preparing and preparation to kind of be at the level where, or be ready for that moment where ultimately he was a protector. He was a protector of sheep, and he was a protector, in that Goliath moment. So I think for me, I tend to no longer look at the goal, or even though I have goals, I tend to no longer like focus on it. But what do I got to do to get ready to get there? You know what I mean? What are the small steps? What are the practical steps? What are my day-to-day steps? I'm big on routine. So that's been super important for me, and I mean, I couldn't stress that enough. Like, I'm big on routines. I'm big on understanding like what the day-to-days have to be,
good.
and I think that Goliath moment would come.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just think we got to take the sexiness out of ministry, right? Because that's what we've made it about. The highlight moments, I would even say altar moments that we've created. David was just being obedient. Like you said, he was just being a protector. So he didn't do anything different for Goliath than he was doing with the sheep. There was nothing different.
Nothing.
And so I just think, again, finding that why and then doing what it is you're supposed to be doing, no matter how big the audience or small the audience, I just think is the most important thing. And then got to play the long game. If we're just obedient step by step by step, to me, that's how you get to the long game, right? If I'm trying to lose 100 pounds, and I keep looking at the scale every day, I'm gonna be discouraged because I just keep looking at the scale every day, right? But if I'm in the gym every day, just doing the things, well, I'm probably going to lose the weight, right? And so, stop staring at the scale every day, trying to look for those big moments, but really just doing the day-to-day stuff. But I love that. Yeah.
That's good. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Man, that's good.
Yeah. Well, this was fun, man. We're going to do this again. We do got an episode coming up soon. We got some special guests that are going to be joining us.
Yeah, talk about that one.
Yeah, I'm super excited. My wife is going to be in there. She's a beast. If you don't know her yet, she's incredible. That's going to be a lot of fun. Jeremy Johnson, my pastor currently, who, man, just saw God do incredible things in youth ministry. And then they have a church plant in downtown LA. It's epic that we're part of. And then Manny Arango, who just is all over the world, crushing it, doing incredible things in the kingdom. And we're going to talk about really revival, particularly in young people, and really what's the point, what's the goal. We got a lot of questions we're going to ask, and I think it's going to be a dope conversation. So I can't wait for the next part of this.
And this is actually an episode people can come to.
Yes, they can. Absolutely. They can show up live Thursday night, March 30th at 7 p.m. at Fearless LA. It's completely free. You just got to register. And man, come join us Thursday night as we get ready to do a live episode with a live audience. You could ask real questions in real time. That's going to be a lot of fun. So I can't wait for that.
I'm excited for it. I'm excited for it.
Dope. Well, thanks, man.
I appreciate you.
We're signing out here. Thanks for tuning in to A Different Cloth. We'll see y'all next time.